Niger's coup is the seventh or the eighth coup to happen on the continent, depending on how you count. The coups that happened in Burkina Faso and more specifically in Mali across the Sahel belt, stretching from the Atlantic coast with Guinea-Conakry all the way to the Red Sea coast involving Sudan. So this is the latest in this series of coups that happened in this part of the African continent. As the latest coup, it raises a number of questions for policy actors on the continent, particularly the African Union and the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. In terms of the regional implications of this coup, first and foremost, this coup took place against a democratically elected government. It raises a number of questions, particularly the question about whether any government in the region and beyond on the African continent would survive or would be immune from the being victim of this kind of incident or coup. There is an additional self-preservation dimension to the concern and the implications of the coup in Niger. It has another implication, and that implication has to do with what the coup in Niger says about how ECOWAS and the African Union dealt with previous coups. There is a concern on the part of policymakers that they haven't done enough, the response was not robust, and therefore they have to respond much more aggressively than they did in the previous coups. From the regional dimension, the G5 Sahel countries, with the withdrawal of Mali from the G5 Sahel, the position of G5 Sahel became weaker. Niger has fallen to coup. The future of G5 Sahel has come into question. Niger also occupies a very significant strategic place, particularly in a time when the Sahel has become a major arena for geostrategic competition and rivalry involving major powers, particularly in the context of the war of Russia against Ukraine, pitting Russia against Western countries, particularly France. So the coup in Niger would mean that all the Central Sahelian countries would be outside of governments that are favorable to what you may consider to be the Western Bloc in this geostrategic rivalry that is playing itself out on the Sahel region. Additionally, Niger, following the coups in Burkina Faso and most importantly the coup in Mali, has become a hub for international response to the terrorism crisis that is afflicting the Sahel region. It is here that France moved its base from Mali. It's also here that the United States of America has its drone base plus 1,000 troops here in Niger. So with the coup in Niger, both the French military base that uses Niger as its hub for the fight against terrorism is positioning for ruling that country as well. Indeed, the junta have announced severing of military cooperation with France, and therefore it will have direct implication on France's military base there in Niger. From also energy security perspective, particularly for Europe and specifically France, the situation in Niger would have direct implications, right? On account of the fact that France sources its uranium supply, a significant portion of its uranium supply that powers its nuclear power station from Niger. And one of the outcomes of the coup in Niger was the announcement by the junta to discontinue the supply of uranium to France. It is against the background of the regional and geostrategic significance of Niger and the implications of the coup in Niger for the region as well as geostrategically that we have to understand the nature of the response from various policy actors, multilateral policy actors on the continent, particularly the African Union and ECOWAS. ECOWAS has taken a lead on this and its commission condemned the coup in Niger in the strongest terms possible. Subsequently, the ECOWAS authority convened a summit on 30th of July, and that summit adopted a litany of very hard measures against the coup. It joined others who, like the African Union, who strongly condemned the coup. It also called for the reinstatement of the deposed President Bazoum. Additionally, and importantly, it also slapped Niger with a litany of sanctions, including closure of borders, the suspension of financial and commercial transactions with Niger. Additionally, it adopted a decision to take all necessary measures, which may include the use of force. And we have to understand this against the background of the message that ECOWAS wished to communicate, that it had reached a point where it wanted to draw a line so that others wouldn't feel encouraged into thinking or entertaining the staging of other coups, other armies in other parts of the ECOWAS region. That is the background against which ECOWAS came into taking this very robust decision. The Peace and Security Council of the African Union also made on an emergency session on the 28th of July. It also adopted a decision which, among others, not only condemned the coup, but also called for the restoration of constitutional order in Niger. And while the Peace and Security Council gave the junta 15 days for restoring constitutional order, ECOWAS on its part gave the junta a 1 week period for reinstating President Bazoum into power. And it's worth mentioning that not just ECOWAS but also others in the international community expressed their support for President Bazoum, but also their recognition of President Bazoum as the legitimate authority of Niger, despite the use of military force would be the most advisable course of action in order to reverse the military coup in Niger. There were a few instances during the last decade in which military force was used in order to achieve democratic objectives. And the first one was in Côte d'Ivoire in 2011-2012, and that had to do with the transfer of power from an incumbent who lost election to a candidate who won the election. The same event happened in 2017 in the Gambia, for the same reason. The incumbent lost the election, and there was a need for facilitating transfer of power from the incumbent who lost the election to the candidate who won the election. And in these two instances, ECOWAS supported the use of force, and with respect to Cote d'Ivoire, it was through the UN. With respect to the Gambia, it was through ECOWAS. But the context differs in these two cases from what we have in Niger. It is difficult to speak of the existence of a coup d'etat in the past 2 decades experience of ECOWAS and the African Union, in which the use of force was deployed for reversing a military seizure of power. This may be the first of its kind in that sense, but there are factors that make it very complicated and difficult to pull off. First, with respect to the question of success. What makes success very difficult, I think, for ECOWAS are 2 factors. The first factor is the fact that military intervention would increase the risk to the life of President Bazoum. And this is significant because the success that ECOWAS is looking for is to reinstate President Bazoum back to power. So that is one factor. The second and equally, if not more important factor, has to do with the peace and security implications of the military intervention, And this has to do with the fact that the military coup hadn't seen or witnessed a strong and robust opposition from Nigerians. That is one. And the second and important aspect has to do with the fact that if military intervention is going to go ahead, it wouldn't just be a fight between ECOWAS forces and the forces from Niger. It would also draw in the forces from Mali and the forces from Burkina Faso as well. It's important to recall that the forces of Mali and Burkina have announced that should military intervention be pursued, they will stand in support of the military junta in Niger. It's worth also recalling that Algeria, which shares border with Niger, also opposes the military intervention. It is against this background that there are opinions, very strong opinions, being expressed that there is a need for putting emphasis on the use of robust diplomatic avenues in order to achieve the expected end with respect to reversing the coup in Niger, even if that reversal of the coup may not take the form of the reinstatement of President Bazoum, but the establishment of a transitional process that would, in the shortest time possible, lead to or culminate in the convening of